Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this recorded sermon coming to you from Mount Vernon Presbyterian Church in Alexandria, Virginia on this Sunday, July 23rd, 2023. My name is Bob Malone, and I'm the pastor, and as is the case each week, welcome. As you prepare to hear from the Spirit this morning, I invite you to take a couple of deep, cleansing breaths. Get comfortable where you are and do whatever you need to do to quiet and still all the noisy voices of the world. That, after all, is what prayer is about, right? It's about becoming attentive to the Spirit's presence within us. It's not asking God for things. It's becoming more mindful of how we are to live as God's children in this world. So again, roll back your shoulders, open your heart, and become particularly attuned to that still small voice within you today. Our scripture lesson comes from the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 13, verses 24 to 30. My sermon is titled, An Unweeded World. Listen now for what the Spirit is saying to you. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. The slaves of the household came and said to the master, "Did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" The master answered, "An enemy has done this." The slaves said, "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" But the master replied, "No. For in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. At the harvest time, I will tell the reapers to collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but then gather the wheat into my barn." Friends, this is the word of the Lord and the poetry of the faithful. Thanks be to God. So let me be honest with you this morning. I'm a weeder. Not that kind. I have absolutely no knowledge of anything having to do with pot. I'm talking about the kind of weed that is being referred to in this morning's second reading from Matthew 13. It couldn't be any clearer, right? Jesus' call is to leave the weeds alone. But I'm a weeder. What can I say? I shared that with you 2 weeks ago during a children's sermon on dandelions. My dad was a weeder, and so I have become a weeder. I grew up weeding not just our own yard and flower beds, but my aunt's huge vegetable garden as well. Our previous homes in both Erie, Pennsylvania and Williamsburg, Virginia were on large lots with lots of flower beds. They were everywhere, and they all required continual weeding. And even though I now live in a townhouse with absolutely no outdoor responsibilities, you will often find me weeding the beds that surround our unit. Some have even caught me weeding right here at church, a task that always needs our attention. Because I'm a weeder. I actually enjoy it. And if you happen to live next door to me, I expect you to be a weeder too. It's in my bones. It's just part of my DNA. And if that isn't bad enough, when I read a passage like the one from Matthew 13, I realize how often I am tempted to be a weeder when it comes to other things, not just flower beds, but to the things of God, to the people with whom I come into contact. Many of you know that I am a firstborn type A perfectionist. But more than that, I am an Enneagram 1. If you don't know what that means, let me briefly explain it to you. The Enneagram is an ancient tool for self-awareness, with origins that some scholars and theologians trace back to followers of Jesus who lived in the 4th century. So it's an old way of understanding human personalities. And it identifies 9 different types. I'm type number 1, known as the reformer. And we reformers, we value order, rules, integrity. And we are always in pursuit of what is morally right and good. We have a very strong concern for integrity. And one of our greatest fears is hypocrisy, that which is corrupt, that which just accepts what is not supposed to be. Now, like all 9 personality types, we ones have good traits and traits that maybe need a little bit of attention now and then. And those traits can be oh so painful. Ones can't see something that is wrong and not try to correct it. Not think that it's our responsibility to correct it. So you can imagine how frustrating life can sometimes be. I still have very vivid memories of those early days in my marriage when I would say something to my wife, my Danish wife, who was still trying to figure out what life was like in America, having been raised in Europe. And she would graciously listen to me and my very explicit thoughts on how something needed to be done. And then she would look at me kind of puzzled and respond by saying, but why? Why do we have to do it that way? And I'd respond by saying, well, because that's just the way you do it. Help me out. Tell me that I'm not the only one who has had to deal with these kinds of feelings and emotions and thoughts. There is our way and the wrong way, right? We ones have very clear and distinct opinions of what is right and what is wrong. And even though when we are in a healthy place, we're willing to embrace all the grayness of life and are actually quick to appreciate all the colors of the rainbow, there are still some things that we see as very black and white, very right or very wrong. We especially move into that area in times of stress. So when it comes to flower beds, weeds, well, weeds just don't belong there. Dandelions do not belong there. And so when they are recognized, our job is to pull them out. Why is that so hard to understand? Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, Jesus seems to have a slight problem with weeders. At least when it involves our understanding of one another. Apparently, when this weeder mentality begins to seep into our spirituality, we become so restless with the world's brokenness, thinking that it's our responsibility to fix everything and everyone, then we will only drive ourselves and others crazy. We start pulling up, criticizing and condemning what we see around us, and we forget to notice the inherent value and worth of everything. We forget to recognize God's love for all creation. Now, I don't think I'm alone here, really. In fact, I think if we're all honest, we'll admit that at times we all have these weeder tendencies. Maybe not so much in our gardening, but at times wanting to fix and clean and organize the world around us. At times, I think we all like drawing circles. Ones that include certain things, certain ideas, certain people, and that exclude other ideas and people. We're tempted to believe that building walls will keep us safe and help us to maintain what is a vital separation between good and bad, right and wrong, legal and illegal, flower and weed, wheat and weed. And too many times, far too many times, in fact, we justify this kind of behavior, even quoting Scripture. What, after all, should light have to do with darkness? Of course, we are to separate ourselves from others. Sheep over here, goats over here. We like our tribe that embraces some and that invariably excludes others. Because deep down inside, we really believe that our tribe is better than other tribes. Certainly better than white supremacists, QAnoners, better than those crazy Christian nationalists out there. But this morning's passage leads us to conclude that maybe life isn't always as black and white as we would like. I mean, sometimes it is. Sometimes there really aren't good people on both sides of an issue. But other times things aren't so much right or wrong. They're just different. Sometimes it's not even about that whole loving the sinner but hating the sin thing. Rather, it's about simply recognizing that we are all on a journey, perhaps even the same journey, just at different places. And because this journey with God isn't always a linear one, it's not even like we can even say that some are ahead and some are behind, that some are further along and some are not. Sometimes we're just in different places, moving at a different pace, taking perhaps a different route. And so that makes weeding, judging others, really difficult. And to make matters worse, because I don't think any of us are fully weed or fully flower, fully weed or fully wheat, we are just not in a position to be judging anyone. I think that's why Jesus has a problem with my weederness, if you will. It's why Jesus is actually more a gardener than a weeder. Interestingly, when he did weed, and he did weed on occasion because he was Jesus, when he did do that, his harshest words, they were actually reserved for people like me, the religious leaders of the day, priests and pastors. So often we were the weeds. But as far as his words for everyone else, Jesus' words for everyone else were always grounded in grace and laced with love. Jesus embraced everyone, and his patience with people, even in their brokenness, should be our guiding star in this life. Why does he seek to grow gardeners in this world and not weeders? Because his desire is never to yank people out of his garden, out of his kingdom. Because who knows what is or isn't a weed? Who gets to make that decision? Who knows what will happen over time with those plants in his garden? Whether or not that barren fig tree will one day bear some fruit. Who knows whether or not that leafy lily will one day bloom. Now we can't take this image too far. This image of weeds and wheat. Because while weeds, like crabgrass or thistle or clover, they can't actually change their identity, with time, people can. So if that's how we're thinking about ourselves in terms of a weed or wheat, we need to recognize that unlike those growing plants, people can change. And that's, I think, something we need to take away from this passage. The work of God's Spirit within all humanity has great transformative power. And so we need to be careful before we give up on anyone. God doesn't. So how dare we? Look at me. I mean, I'm far from perfect, but I have come a long way. 38 years of marriage. My wife has had a lot of time to teach me many things. I'm better because of it. I've also done a lot of self-study, a lot of work on myself. And I've learned that when it comes to people, sometimes it's hard to know what is wheat and what is weed. Perhaps you've noticed in our church memorial garden that one of the beds is full of wild violets. And I've learned over the past couple of years that some of you love those wild violets, while others of you would prefer they just all be pulled out, so they won't spread everywhere. And I won't mention any names this morning. I like liriope in a clump or in a nice straight line. Others just like it growing wild wherever it will, however the Spirit leads it to spread. I don't like clover in my lawn. Some people love it. And even when we may agree on what needs to be pulled up, sometimes that can't always be done. In a bed where everything is growing close together, sometimes, as we see in this morning's lesson, the roots are so entangled and intertwined that it's impossible to just pull up the weed without pulling up everything else around it. So when we apply this gardening principle to the way we relate to others, man, I hope the lesson becomes obvious. Who are we to judge? Who are we to decide who's in and who's out? Who are we to even make the decision that some are in and some are out? In fact, the passage kind of gives the impression that there is something good from us all just growing together, right? Isn't that what it seems like Jesus is trying to say according to Matthew? And how many of us can give testimony to that fact? That we can learn from everyone, even if it's nothing more that I don't want to be like that person, like that follower of Jesus. Just as many Christ followers have repelled me as have attracted me. And I've learned from all of them. Because when we're all growing together, bumping limbs and leaves, we don't just hurt and harm. We also strengthen and support. A second lesson that I think we can take away from this parable comes when we think about people not so much as the weed or the wheat, but when we think of ourselves as the actual garden. Think about that for a moment this morning. Righteous anger, a good thing, can easily become violent, a not so good thing. When we think of ourselves as the garden, we think about all those things within us that are good and that are not so good, and how sometimes they have the very same root. Pursuing justice sometimes involves breaking the peace. And that whole claiming to love the sinner but hate the sin thing, sometimes that is nothing more than bias or prejudice going unchecked. And that's why Jesus says, just leave all of those things within you alone. Let them mature. Let them develop. Love every part of who you are, because all of it will contribute to who you are becoming. In so many ways, we're all gardens with beautiful, juicy, bright red tomatoes and prickly purple thistles, with luscious vines that have the ability to bear plump, sweet blueberries, but that also have that nasty wiregrass creeping where it's not supposed to be. Poet Ella Wheeler Wilcox has said that a weed is but an unloved flower. All sin is a virtue unevolved. Life and faithfulness, they're awfully gray, aren't they? That's hard for us Enneagram 1s to admit. The journey of following Jesus is always about steps that move us both forward and backwards. And while we're always striving to have more forward movement than backward movement, the backward movement is hard to eliminate altogether. And so while we must always practice discernment, mindful that some things are from God and some things are not, we are all in process, every one of us. And we would do well to learn to focus on, perhaps even learn to love who we are in this process, who we are on this journey, regardless of where we might be. When we look at this passage in its proper context, this really comes into play, because the writer, again, believed to be Matthew, he's dealing with the realization that Jesus is likely now not coming back as soon as people thought he was. And so this parable is about God giving us time. He tells his servants, the reapers, to wait, to leave the garden alone. Is Jesus telling us to give others and ourselves time so that we too might grow, so that we might eventually experience some kind of transformation, a change that is so central to our understanding of God? With God, it's never too late to bear fruit. It's never too late to bloom in this garden called life. So we can never give up on ourselves. We can never give up on one another. We all need to dig deep, giving all we can to those around us so that they might grow, and taking whatever it is we need to help us grow, to help us and one another become all that God desires for us. An unweeded world is not necessarily a bad thing. I've shared before that it's been said that, excuse me for kicking the screen there. It's been said that we pastors have 2 or 3 messages that we preach every week, but with different words. And you know that one of mine is that we are loved, all of us. My one and only tattoo is a reminder that we are all loved. And when we learn to better see that love, our gardens will grow. They will bear fruit. And we and those around us will bloom. So this week, as you consider your garden, your life, and are tempted to see the weeds, see the love, God's love, for whatever is around you. And when you look at that garden that is your life, do the same thing. Be patient. Discover your potential. See and discover what God is seeking to do within each of us. And give yourself and others whatever time is needed to become the wheat that we all are. This world doesn't need any more weeders. This world needs gardeners, people who see the beauty, who see the potential in everyone and everything. May we learn to better see the love for God's glory. Amen. Friends, have a great week, and I look forward to meeting you again right back here online next Sunday morning. Until then, peace.